Some stories refuse to die. They live in the whispers. They live in the shadows. They live in the places history refuses to close a chapter on.
Sometimes it's the brutality. Sometimes it's the mystery. Sometimes it's the idea that the person responsible walked away and blended right back into society.
Tonight, we take two of the darkest cases in American criminal history, cases that seemed separate, unconnected, entirely different monsters.
And we ask a question nobody really wanted to ask, because if the answer is yes, it forces us to stare into something far more terrifying.
Two cases, two eras, two legends of violence.
Possibly.
Written by one man.
This is the Cold Case Corridor.
Welcome to the first official episode. If you're here, you're like us. You don't just want mystery. You don't just want shock value. You want truth. Or at least you want to get as close to truth as the evidence will let us.
I'm Sasha Reyes, investigative journalist, criminal justice reporter. I've spent years digging through court records, chasing leads that didn't want to be chased, and interviewing families whose lives never fully healed because their stories never got an ending.
And I'm Miles Granger, former military intelligence analyst. I've analyzed threat patterns, psychological profiles, and more classified documents than I could legally acknowledge even if I wanted to. Cold cases always left the mark on me because they represent unfinished business, stories that never close.
And this show isn't entertainment dressed as truth. It isn't Guess the Murderer game night. This podcast operates on three core principles. 1, we distinguish fact from theory. 2, we maintain respect for victims and their families. 3, we refuse to inflate claims for cheap drama.
You will hear us say, this is confirmed, or this is speculation, or this is our opinion based on available evidence. And when we do speculate, we'll own it.
Because trust has to exist in true crime, and blind certainty has no place in unresolved cases.
Tonight, we begin with two names. One is not a killer. One never hurt anyone. One was simply a human being who trusted the wrong world. Elizabeth Short, known forever as the Black Dahlia.
The other, no confirmed identity, no proven face, a myth wearing human skin, the Zodiac Killer.
Separate crimes, separate decades, separate psychological worlds, until recently when a claim surfaced suggesting maybe not. A claim suggesting that someone may have cracked one of Zodiac's ciphers, and that hidden name might connect directly to Elizabeth Short's killer.
Tonight, we ask, is that even remotely possible? Does the theory hold weight? Or is it another chapter in the long tradition of people wanting answers so badly, they start stitching coincidences together until they convince themselves they've made a masterpiece?
To answer that, we can't start with the theory. We have to start with the truth. We have to start in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles in the late 1940s wasn't the Los Angeles people romanticize today. It wasn't neon lights and polished Hollywood stories. It was a city in transition, post-war, restless, a place full of people who came looking for dreams and instead found harshness, loneliness, reality. And in January of 1947, Los Angeles found something else.
It found horror. It's the morning of January 15th, 1947. A mother is walking with her 3-year-old daughter in Leimert Park. She sees something in a vacant lot, something pale, something she thinks is a discarded department store mannequin. She looks closer. It isn't. What she is looking at is the mutilated body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short.
Fact: Elizabeth's body had been severed cleanly at the waist. Fact: she had been drained almost completely of blood. Fact: her face had been slashed, carved into a grotesque, forced smile. Fact: her body had been washed and then intentionally posed.
We're not going to linger on graphic description. We don't need to. If you know the Black Dahlia case, you already know how violent it was. If you don't, what matters isn't the shock factor. What matters is what the killer communicated by doing this.
This wasn't sloppy rage. This wasn't impulsive violence. This was control. This was ritual. This was someone saying, I decide what happens here.
Before she became the Black Dahlia, she was just Elizabeth Short. She was born in 1924. She moved frequently. She lived a life caught between survival and hope. Hollywood didn't discover her. The media invented that part. She wasn't a glamorous actress. She wasn't an icon when she was alive. She was a young woman trying to exist in a world that wasn't very kind to women with few resources. She had friends. She laughed. She had complicated relationships. She was vulnerable. And she deserved a normal life.
That's important to say because too many people turn Elizabeth Short into an aesthetic, a legend, a piece of noir pop culture. But the truth is, she was human first. Everything else came later. The LAPD launches one of the largest investigations in its history. Detectives interview hundreds of people, doctors, surgeons, butchers, anyone with anatomical knowledge. Evidence suggests the cuts were precise. The separation at the waist was done with skill. There was technique involved that wasn't common knowledge.
And then the media got involved. Newspapers sensationalized. Photographers swarmed. They nicknamed her the Black Dahlia, twisting her memory into narrative entertainment. And as the story exploded, so did suspects.
At one point, more than 150 suspects existed. Some were credible, many were not. Some were men looking for attention. Some were mentally unstable, confessing to something they didn't do. Some may have just wanted to feel powerful by inserting themselves into an infamous crime.
Over the years, certain names stood out. Fact: many investigators believe her killer had medical knowledge. Fact: a number of suspects were connected to hospital environments, military surgery, or anatomy study. Fact: none were ever legally proven responsible.
Books came, documentaries came, definitive theories came. People swore their father, their neighbor, their acquaintance did it, but nothing ever became concrete enough to stand as undisputed truth.
Why does the Black Dahlia stick in our collective mind? It isn't just the brutality, it's the puzzle. The killer clearly, deliberately communicated something with the mutilation and posing. It wasn't random positioning. It wasn't careless disposal. It was, I control this narrative.
It also reflects something darker about culture. The world saw a woman gruesomely mutilated, and instead of mourning, people consumed it, turned it into headlines, turned it into urban legend, turned her trauma into macabre fascination. And somewhere in that process, the killer won, at least a little, because they wanted attention, they wanted immortality, and they got it. So put a pin in everything we just discussed. Precision, control, surgical capability, a message hidden not in words, but in presentation. Now, fast forward 20 years, Northern California, different landscape, different method, different decade. But another presence emerges who also wants attention, not through bodies posed in fields, but through letters, codes, puzzles, and a voice that haunted law enforcement, as if he wanted the same thing Elizabeth Short's killer wanted: control of the story.
This is where our corridor stretches forward. This is where another monster enters, the Zodiac.
And it is only when you fully understand both that you can even begin to evaluate whether the recent claims that link them are possible, laughable, or maybe worth taking seriously. Northern California, the late 1960s. America's changing, culturally, politically, emotionally. War overseas, protests at home. generational tension tightening like a wire. And in the middle of it, someone decides the world isn't chaotic enough. Someone decides he wants to play. On December 20th, 1968, at Lake Herman Road, two teenagers are shot in a Lover's Lane-style setting. The case shocks the community, but at first, it feels like a tragic but isolated crime. Then,
6 months later, another shooting, another couple, Blue Rock Springs. This one is different because this one comes with something else. A phone call, a confession, a voice that sounds almost casual, detached, as if reporting the weather.
Then, the letters begin arriving at newspapers. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, the Vallejo Times-Herald. They aren't just letters, they're statements, threats, stories, challenges. Signed, Zodiac.
He doesn't just say he killed, he gives details only the killer could know. He supplies coded messages, demanding newspapers print them, threatening more violence if they don't. He turns murder into communication. He makes death conversational.
Let's lock this in clearly. Fact. Zodiac commits, or claims to commit, multiple attacks. Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, the murder of San Francisco cab driver Paul Stein. Fact. He sends multiple coded ciphers. Fact. Some are cracked. Fact. Others are debated or still unresolved.
Zodiac makes himself the main character in his own story. He taunts police. He mocks investigators. He belittles efforts to stop him. He threatens school buses. He isn't hiding in the shadows like many killers. He wants center stage.
Psychologically, Zodiac represents something rare. He's not just violent, he's performative. He's obsessed with narrative control, with being perceived as smarter, superior, untouchable. This isn't someone who only wants the physical act of murder. He wants
power, but not physical power, cultural power, psychological dominance over entire communities. He wants the police chasing him in circles. He wants the public afraid. He wants his identity to matter more than the identities of his victims. He wants immortality.
Let's talk codes, because without understanding this part, the newer theory that connects him to the Black Dahlia later doesn't matter. Zodiac sends multiple ciphers. One of them, famously, is solved. It doesn't name him. It instead reveals mindset, narcissism, superiority complex, emotional detachment, craving attention.
Then comes another cipher, and another. One particularly short one becomes incredibly debated, the 13-symbol cipher. Cryptographers have long argued it's too short to conclusively solve. Any solution runs the risk of being projection. People can force meaning from randomness. And yet, humans don't like leaving puzzles unsolved, so people keep trying. They keep searching for the answer. Because if one of these ciphers really does contain a name, it would be one of the greatest revelations in criminal history.
There are witness accounts, descriptions, a general build, eyeglasses, certain mannerisms, estimated age. Nothing ever completely airtight, but enough to build rough sketches of who he might have been.
And those sketches matter later, because if someone wants to claim that a name hidden in a cipher belongs to a real person, they need that name to feel like it could realistically align with physical description, geography, timeline, skill set, emotional profile. That's where we start drifting toward the bridge between these two worlds, but not yet. We aren't jumping there yet. We're still grounding in truth.
Police do everything they can. Regional cooperation, evidence examinations, handwriting analysis, suspect interviews. Over the decades, dozens of suspects named, some compelling, some completely absurd, a few terrifyingly close. But every time the investigation seems like it could land, it slips. Evidence problems, time decay, conflicting expert opinions, lack of definitive DNA.
Even today, modern technology hasn't given us full answers. Even today, Zodiac remains unsolved, and any unsolved case over decades becomes a magnet for obsession, for fantasy, for theory, for ego-driven solvers, for genuine truth seekers, for people who just want this story to end.
The legacy of the Zodiac case isn't just that someone killed and got away with it. It's that someone killed and then turned the entire state into an audience. He forced law enforcement to play his game. He forced newspapers to participate. He forced the public into his theater. And even decades later, he still controls discussion.
Just like Elizabeth Short's killer controlled her narrative through brutality and posing and calculated horror, Zodiac controlled his narrative through intellect, communication, and public psychological manipulation. Different tools, same obsession. Control.
So now we have a killer obsessed with theatrical display and psychological dominance in 1947. Another killer obsessed with intelligent control and narrative power in the late 1960s. Separated by time, separated by geography, separated by method. And then someone stands up in modern day and says, I cracked something. I found a name. And that name may belong to one man responsible for both.
That's the pitch. That's the hook. That's what pulled the world's attention for a moment. Now, let's get very clear. Everything from this point forward about this supposed suspect is theory, not proven fact, not law enforcement verified, not officially recognized as solved. We are not here to publicly identify unproven suspects. We don't drag real human beings into speculative accusation theater. So we're not going to name the claimed individual, because if there's even a fraction of a chance they are not responsible, they deserve the dignity of not being put on public execution display in podcast format.
That's important. We're discussing whether the logic of the theory works, not accusing anyone. So here is what supposedly makes this theory attractive. The alleged name, supposedly, appears when applying a specific decoding interpretation, connects to a military medical history, geographically overlaps California, plausibly existed in LA in the late 1940s, plausibly existed in Northern California during Zodiac activity, fits a basic physical witness description, and psychologically could fit someone who evolves from one behavioral type of crime to another. On paper, that's an intoxicating cocktail for true crime researchers.
Let's be fair, if a person had medical training, lived in California, had a potentially complex psychological profile, existed in the right time frames, and left linguistic breadcrumbs in communication, then yes, you can argue possibility. You can argue, is this worth looking at? Absolutely. But possibility is not proof. Possibility is not justice.
Here's where things start weakening. Cipher science says short codes create flexible outcomes, meaning you can find whatever you want to find if you stare long enough. People have solved this cipher before, dozens of times, each producing a different solution, each producing different names. Unless verified by multiple independent cryptographic experts, historical document validation, forensic paper trail, and ideally hard evidence, then a cipher interpretation is speculation wearing confidence as a costume.
And confidence doesn't make a theory true, it just makes it louder. Here's something important. People have spent entire lifetimes chasing the identity of Zodiac. Retired cops, journalists, amateur sleuths, historians, internet detectives, genuine professionals. Some did it for justice, some for ego, some because the mystery became a part of their identity. And in that landscape, a bold claim gets attention. A bold claim feels like relief. Oh good, finally, someone solved it. But we can't let emotional hunger for resolution replace disciplined evaluation.
Because we aren't just playing detective here. We're talking about real victims, real families, real reputations, real legal systems, real historical accuracy. If we get this wrong, we aren't just misreading a crossword puzzle. We're rewriting history carelessly. So let's entertain the biggest question. Independent of the cipher, could one individual realistically commit both crimes?
My opinion, yes, it is possible. Uncommon, strange, psychologically unusual, yes, but within the realm of human behavior, not impossible.
My opinion, also yes. Biologically and logistically, time aligns. Psychologically, it's weird, but weird doesn't mean unreal. Humans don't stay the same across decades. Trauma changes behavior. Aging changes behavior. Societal pressures reshape identity. Confidence and experience reshape method. A man who commits an anatomically precise, brutal crime in youth could, decades later, seek superiority through intellect and communication rather than physical brutality. It's not typical, but it's not fantasy.
But this specific theory, it breaks in key places. 1, the cipher solution is not universally accepted. 2, law enforcement has not endorsed this conclusion. 3, some evidence used to tie identity to crimes remains circumstantial at best. And 4, there are existing historical gaps that require assumption stacking. And the moment a theory requires too many leaps, we slow down.
And here's something rarely admitted in true crime circles. Sometimes people resent unsolved. Sometimes it's psychologically easier to believe a weak theory than accept that something this infamous might never be answerable.
There's something deeply human about wanting closure. We don't like loose ends. We don't like maybe. We don't like unknown. But truth doesn't care about convenience. Truth doesn't care about narrative satisfaction. Truth doesn't care about whether a podcast, a newspaper headline, or a researcher wants to feel victorious. Sometimes truth is silence. Sometimes truth is waiting.
We do what responsible investigators do. We file it under interesting, potentially worth monitoring, not proven, not discarded. We don't call it solved. We don't ignore it. We place it calmly in the ongoing hypothesis bank where it belongs, and we watch, we wait, we remain curious, but disciplined.
Because cases like this don't deserve hype. They deserve honesty. And honesty often lives right in the uncomfortable middle. Not confident triumph, not cynical dismissal, just responsibility.
So that's where this stands. A bold claim, some compelling alignments, some structural weaknesses, not proven, not pointless, just unresolved.
Just like the crimes themselves. But unresolved doesn't mean forgotten. Unresolved doesn't mean unworthy of pursuit. Unresolved still matters.
And now we arrive at the hardest part: conclusion, perspective, and what we believe we can responsibly say tonight. Tonight, we walk through two of the darkest corners of American crime history, not because mystery thrills us, but because truth matters.
We looked at the murder of Elizabeth Short, a young woman caught in a world that failed her, who deserved compassion and instead became a myth. We looked at the Zodiac, a killer who turned violence into theater, who manipulated fear as though it were a script he was directing.
And we looked at a theory claiming those two realities may have belonged to one man. We examined what felt compelling, what fell apart, where probability lives, where fantasy disguises itself as logic. We didn't dismiss, we didn't blindly accept. We stood in the only place responsible investigators belong, right between curiosity and caution. So here is my closing position, my opinion. The theory, interesting, worth attention, worth continued observation. But right now, it does not meet the threshold of proof. There is not enough there, yet, for us to responsibly call this solved. And until that day, if it ever comes, discipline requires humility.
And my closing position? I think people forget something important. Unsolved crimes don't just belong to historians. They don't belong to TV shows. They don't belong to internet discussion boards. They belong to the victims and to the truth. And until both are honored correctly, we don't force an ending just because we're tired of waiting for one. We keep going. We keep questioning. We keep caring, without pretending certainty exists where it doesn't. Elizabeth Short was not born the Black Dahlia. She didn't choose that name. That identity was put on her after death by people who saw shock value before humanity. And the Zodiac victims? They didn't sign up to become character roles in an unsolved legend. They were living lives, loving people, planning futures. And somewhere there are still families, generations later, who carry pieces of that pain.
So when we approach these stories, we do it knowing that real people bleed behind every headline. That's the responsibility. That's the weight. And it has to stay present, always.
Sometimes the truth makes headlines. Sometimes the truth lives in archived documents. Sometimes the truth is buried in files someone hasn't opened yet. Sometimes the truth dies with the person who carried it.
But here's something I deeply believe. Every time we revisit these cases with respect, every time we discuss them honestly, every time we say their names with intention, we refuse to let indifference win. And indifference is the real enemy of justice.
If you've stayed with us this far tonight, you're not just a true crime fan. You're someone who understands that history deserves honesty, that curiosity comes with responsibility, that unsolved cases aren't cool. They're tragedies with unanswered questions.
We invite you to think critically, not to accept every headline, not to chase every sensational claim. Ask, what's proven? What's speculation? What's missing? What does justice require? Because when enough of us demand responsible truth, irresponsible noise loses power. Tonight, we did not solve the Black Dahlia. We did not solve Zodiac. We did not pretend certainty existed. We did something better. We refused to lie to ourselves just to feel closure.
And that matters, because cold cases don't stay cold forever. Sometimes a new document appears. Sometimes a witness finds courage. Sometimes technology evolves. Sometimes truth waits for the right moment to surface. And sometimes all we can do is hold space for it.
Thank you for walking this corridor with us.
This has been episode 1 of the Cold Case Corridor.
If you want us to keep following developments in this theory, tell us. If there's another cold case you want us to examine, tell us. But most importantly, walk carefully with truth.
Because the shadows don't intimidate us. They remind us why light matters.
We'll see you next time in the Cold Case Corridor.